So, what was the spotted owl incident? Who found the spotted owl? Was it an endangered species? How did that all come about?
As far as I can recollect, the spotted owl, and I'm not sure who went out and counted them, but it was some kind of government entity, said that they were in the decline and they were losing their habitat, and they had the spotted owl declared an endangered species because of its habitat. Now, loggers being in the woods on a daily basis, of course, they were never asked. So, shutting down all the woodlands from logging, trees are just like a crop of corn, except for trees take 60, 70 years to get to full harvestable age. And after that age, they start getting buggy, they're rotting on the inside, they're actually dangerous, you can't use the wood, they blow over in windstorms. So prior to then, the Forest Service and the loggers worked together to keep a local management of timberlands, and they were very healthy.
Today's forestry board is inundated by young environmentalists like Jessica Butt, Noah McKell, and this guy standing in the corner over here, quietly doxing and photographing people in the room. This was from yesterday's testimony when they threatened the Oregon Forestry Board on no uncertain terms. Have a listen for yourself.
Go ahead.
Okay. So my name is Jessica Butt, and I'm here alongside my colleague Noah Michael. We're part of petitioner Cascadia Wildlands legal team here representing Nick Cady today. So today we're just going to plainly and very concisely lay out the black letter law here, specifically the Board of Forestry's statute imposed non-discretionary duties. We've spoken about that briefly today. I'm going to go into a little more depth. So specifically, we're concerned today with the resource site inventory and rulemaking responsibilities of this board. Great. So the duties and powers of the board are all very neatly and concisely found in one place, as I'm sure you know, written under ORS 527-710, and this slide just shows you the location of that statute in the legislature. So this board is legally required, again, as I'm sure you're familiar with these rules, to adopt rules to provide for the overall maintenance of fish and wildlife species. And all of the board's responsibilities, of course, are consistent with its foundational policy considerations, which are found under ORS 527-630, which Noah will briefly discuss in a moment. The board is further required to, and I'll be reading some of the language here, collect and analyze the best possible information and establish inventories of resource sites needing protection, specifically for threatened and endangered species, both state and federally listed. Again, this includes Oregon's 3 remaining coho salmon ESUs, which are both state and federally listed threatened species, one of which is a state-listed endangered species. So upon a determination that forest practices would conflict with these resource sites, the board is then required to determine the consequences of these conflicting uses and establish the appropriate levels of protection for these concerned resource sites. And then finally, having completed all of the above requirements, the board is, again, legally obligated, these obligations are not optional or discretionary, legally obligated to adopt rules to protect resource sites that they've inventoried.
So I started on this video the day after this meeting. This board meeting was July 24th, Wednesday. And in case you didn't catch that, that was a direct threat to the Oregon Forestry Board by Cascadia Wildlife legal team representing Nick Cady. And what they basically stated was that if the Oregon Forestry Board did not adopt this petition, they would be bringing forth a lawsuit. And In an effort to save the taxpayer money, the board did end up adapting this petition. They opted for option number 4, which gives them decision making over which rules and regulations end up going into effect. But for those of you who didn't catch it, what she's talking about is private property and what needs to happen on private property to protect coho salmon. The interesting thing about this is the river, the entire river, and all the waterways are now considered part of that restricted use habitat for the coho salmon. So this is going to be very interesting and will pretty much completely change logging operations in the state of Oregon.
Healthy. I've gone camping in the same area for 55 years. I've watched it go from a beautiful, lush area to dead, dying, and diseased. There was a beetle that came through that couldn't be addressed because of environmentalists that started killing off the trees, and by that time the spotted owl had already been deemed endangered, so those areas could not be logged. And then 5 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, they had their first fire, and it was severe because there was so much dead standing timber. And I don't think people realize a dead standing tree, it goes woof, and all the embers fly to the top of the next dead tree. They fly a football field's length. So the only way to actually battle the fire is from the air. For ground crews to go in, it is so incredibly dangerous, they won't. Well, that area that burned, the federal government said they could have a skidding road X amount of feet off Forest Service road, and the rest had to be helicopter logged, which is the most expensive logging.
Right.
So nobody bid on the jobs because they'd start in the red and finish in the red. 10 years later, another forest fire came through. It looks like a moonscape. And there's an entire forest, looks like a moonscape, hasn't been replanted, and these dead, half-burnt trees are laying there as fuel for the next fire. That's why we're having mega fires. It's lack of proper management by local people that are in the know.
Tracking breaking news tonight, a wildfire burning in the Columbia River Gorge. 140 hikers are essentially trapped and will have to spend the night hoping for the best.
What a sight this is behind us. In the hours we've been out here covering this fire, it is no doubt growing. Take a look, a true hell on earth, almost apocalyptic looking. Embers are still flying, heavy ash raining down for miles. And as you can see right there, entire cliff sides engulfed in flames.
It had been a really hot, dry summer. There had been a lot of fuel building up because of a very wet spring. And then it was day after day of temperatures in the 90s. All it takes is one spark to ignite the forest.
This map is the fire progression of the Eagle Creek fire. Fire started here on Eagle Creek, and it went over this ridge overnight and down towards Cascade Locks. Day 2 is this darker purple, and then day 3 is this lighter purple here.
The fire was difficult to put out for a couple of reasons. One, it was on very steep terrain. Much of it burned within a wilderness area where there are no roads. And then also the policy is within the backcountry and wild areas. Again, fire is a part of forest ecology. Where they concentrated their efforts is around population centers.
Cascade Locks is a teeny tiny little fishing town that used to be a lumber town, but now our business and our livelihoods rely on tourism, obviously, the hiking, the trails, and things like that. Columbia River Gorge is just a beautiful scenic area full of mountains, full of wildlife. People come here to hike, to bike, to camp, to sightsee, and I think most people that come here wind up staying. The night of the fire, I walked outside to the backyard of the restaurant here, and I looked up and I saw this big gigantic smoke plume, and I thought, oh crap.
And with the spotted owl incident, they used that to quarter off how much area? Do you remember?
The spotted owl goes, it's Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and I think perhaps even part of Montana.
Good grief.
So it's huge, huge, huge. And when they say that you can have 1 million more board feet, that's only like three days to a week's worth of logging. It's nothing. So, to get a visual, you almost need to see how many board feet is in a tree. And of course, how big is the diameter at the base? So, and through the spotted owl too, Oregon and Washington had many mills that took large timber, which would be considered second growth. There's only one left.
Only one mill left?
Large mill for large timber.
Oh, wow.
Left. They all shut down.
Well, and there's an initiative petition out right now that would make old growth logging completely illegal.
There is no such thing as old growth. That's a flippin' farce.
Can you explain that?
Okay, the reason why I say that, if you actually look at history and logging from late 1800s, early 1900s, that was the true old growth.
Right.
That was long, long ago, cut down, harvested. What they're calling old growth today is probably second or third growth. So we had second growth trees on our property that were 5 to 6 feet in diameter, but they were only like 60 years old. So, and the misnomer is on the East Coast, because of the super harsh winters, their forests looks like a bunch of scrub brush. And here in the Northwest, you plant a seedling, and in 7 years you have a 6-foot tall Christmas tree. My husband planted Christmas trees. In 20 years, they were 40 feet tall. So people need to ask, what part of the country are you talking about? What's the growth rate? Things like that.
Right. Well, and I think it's just kind of a blanket statement, because there's not really a provision in the initiative petition that determines what old growth is. So it could be any tree that's not, essentially worth logging.
And unfortunately, all of us need to really look at history. When they talk about no logging roads, if you go back to the Tillamook burns, there were 2. And the reason why they were so ungodly, horrendous, there was no access to the land to get in to fight the fire.
Right.
The only trained fire crews were loggers. The whole entire area was replanted by local civic groups like Eagles, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and when they replanted it, it was said that the Tillamook Forest belonged to the people too log to support schools and the state. Well,
That
not
reminds
that
me,
way anymore.
right? That reminds me a lot of the Elliott. The Elliott was handed over to the state. It was it like 1,000 acres, 100,000 acres?
83,000 acres.
83,000 acres, that's right. And the state decided it didn't want to log it. But all that money was going to the schools and also to PERS. And now we have this massive $26 billion deficit. And
they didn't want to maintain it because it costs a certain amount of money, so they're going to turn over 83,000 acres, which I need to look up how many acres make a mile, to OHSU as a study forest, which will be the largest study forest in the nation. I don't know what they're going to study, but with the spotted owl, most definitely, everybody's income dropped. Everybody's standard of living dropped. They hoped they were young enough to be retrained for something else. Small areas dried up and blew away. Broughton's Mill, they had to have employed at least 500-600 people. That's been completely shut down. Broughton's Mill is the one that had the log flume, the last working log flume from Mill A to the Columbia River. And so Mill A, the town of Mill A, is virtually gone.
wow.
Broughton Lumber, gone. Flume, gone. And growing up through the gorge, it was small town life. Like I said before, people that really loved where they lived and they managed their family.
After the spotted owl incident, Oregon's economy absolutely tanked, and it just has never recovered since.
Spotted Owl and National Scenic Area Act happened closely together.
And what were they?
Scenic Area Act said that the Columbia River Gorge would become somewhat like Yellowstone. It was a scenic area. It needed to be protected from being destroyed and spoiled. Well, looking at the history of the gorge, the people that lived there loved it and were very good stewards of their area. And when the Scenic Area Act actually passed, one of the drawbacks was, had you planted timber for your retirement monies, you knew once that act passed, you couldn't cut down trees on your own population. Timber dollars funded our schools completely. Tax money stayed within the county it was created from. They had after-school buses to take you home after whatever sport. So you're talking 40 miles across and 30 to 40 miles deep for activity buses. Our schools were awesome. Everything was updated, wonderful. And then the spotted owl stuff came through. Copli, the local mill, had close to 500 employees, 2 or 3 shifts. Copli was shut down. WK Mill was a booming mill, not sure how many employees, but luckily they survived. but their fleet of trucks is gone, and I believe they only run a single shift. Krohn's logging trucks, they had 30 trucks in 1978. By the time the Spotted Owl stuff was over, they had 8 trucks. So people late 40s, early 50s, they were too old to be retrained. Yes, there were federal dollars for retraining, but who wants to hire a 50-year-old? So, alcoholism rose, drug addiction rose, family violence escalated, because with unemployment comes depression. And of course, the tax dollars for the schools disappeared. Stevenson had to shut down their middle school because they can't afford to rent it anymore. They had a wonderful swimming pool. After 40 years, it's closed. They had swimming lessons. That was part of the PE program. That's gone.
Wow.
So, and nobody paid anything to be in sports. Of course, now you do, like in any other school district. So, and then of course, with the Gorge Act happening at the same time, Skamania Lodge was built, and it was said, oh, everybody can get higher paying jobs, and there would be livable
wage to $15 an hour by 2018 in New York City, and by 2021 for the rest of the state. The move applies to fast food chains with 30 or more locations nationwide. New York's current minimum hourly wage across all industries is $8.75. It is set to increase to $9 at the end of this year. The state labor commissioner still must accept this recommendation. Jonathan, let's talk about the implications of raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour.
What about 20?
Yeah.
Let's do it 50.
Yeah, right.
I mean, wages, Maria, are not arbitrary. It's just a number that you can pick out of a hat. They're based on reality. They're based on supply and demand. So to your point, what's the upshot is loss of jobs. It's not even my estimate. I mean, it's what the Labor Department said in the 1930s when the first minimum wage was instituted. So the real danger here, though, isn't just jobs for the average Joe Sixpack. It's for the younger people who are trying to learn those skills. And, youth unemployment has gone down ever since George Bush started raising the minimum wage. During his term, you're going to see it go down, and you're going to see unemployment go up as a result.
Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is the exact same thought process that the left continuously displays. It's the same ideology that shut down the entire economy through the Columbia River Gorge and figured, no, people can become managerial staff at a lodge after logging for 50 plus years. We'll just see what happens. It's unacceptable, and it doesn't make any sense. Cannot borrow from Paul to pay Peter for the rest of our lives. Paul's gonna want to get paid, baby. Consequences aren't something that the left is too keen on. Doesn't seem like they really understand fully the consequences of their actions. Carbon sequestration is something that every child has been taught since the time they were young. Trees breathe carbon, they exhale oxygen. When did we as a society forget this fact? Furthermore, young seedlings and trees sequester more carbon than old trees do. When trees get to be about 40, 50, 60 years old, they start getting buggy. And when we're not able to have proper forest management, we're not able to have loggers go in, mark trees, and take them out appropriately, we end up with massive amounts of fuel for these mega fires. that we're seeing happen more and more frequently. People are losing their homes, people are losing their land, people are being put off of their own land, and then building regulations are put into place, zoning regulations are put into place, and individuals can't even rebuild on their ancestral homeland, their farmlands, their homesteads that they've had in their family for generations and generations. We need balance. We need to have common sense regulations, and unfortunately this new coho petition that was just adopted is exactly like the spotted owl incident all over again. On top of that, we have initiative petitions 35, 36, and 37 that have been put forth by the environmental groups to usurp the legislative process after 2020 was killed. They're using the Administrative Procedures Act to completely sideline private land and property owners. And this is something that people need to wake up to. This is a huge issue, and it is increasing, and it is 100% in Agenda. If you are not familiar with Agenda 21, I would highly suggest that you read it, and I'll even put a link to it in the description of the video. Agenda 21 is alarming, to say the least. This is the simulated reserve and corridor system. This is the map put forth by Agenda 21. This is the new zoning. And if you take a look at it, those little teeny tiny blue dots, that's the only area that they want fit for habitation, human habitation anymore. Everything else in the red and the yellow is off limits to human use. So we're talking about the Internet of Things, we're talking about smart cities, stack 'em, pack 'em housing. This is not a joke, this is very serious. And it starts in these meetings, it starts in these rooms with environmental groups threatening lawsuits against our Board of Forestry for private landowners logging their own land. Furthermore, the Wildlife Corridor Bill was just passed in this last Oregon legislative session, which will ban people from being able to get to their logging contracts. It will also ban just normal people wanting to go for a hike in the woods. It will ban access to anything that is deemed a wildlife corridor. The time to act is now. Join us at Timber Unity 501c4 on Facebook and find out what you can do to get involved and take action.